The Overwatch League was the most ambitious esports undertaking of all time. In its inaugural season, there were 12 teams, each with a $20 million buy-in, with league minimum contracts for the players. The Overwatch League gained a lot of legitimacy when they got two individuals to buy into the league. The first was Stan Kroenke, the owner of the Los Angeles Rams, the Denver Nuggets, the Colorado Avalanche, Arsenal, and a collection of teams in other minor sports leagues. Stan Kroenke bought the Los Angeles Gladiators. The other big player they got to buy into the Overwatch League was Robert Kraft, who is the owner of the New England Patriots and also a fan of massages, I guess. He bought the Boston Uprising. Other teams were bought by esports organizations like NRG or Gen G, Immortals, and Cloud9. The structure of the league was to be 40 regular season games broken into 4 stages with playoffs at the end. Each regular season game would be broadcast onto Twitch out of the Blizzard Arena in LA. This was all with the idea of eventually expanding the league. Teams would play in their own home cities, and it'd be more like the NHL or the NFL or the MLB, where teams are traveling around to play. In terms of roster construction, there were basically 2 different strategies. The first was to bring a team in pretty much whole cloth, which is what a lot of the teams that were bought by esports organizations did. Then other teams, like the Gladiators, Uprising, and Fusion, tried to pick up the best players available. But one team put a limit on themselves, and that team was the Shanghai Dragons. The Shanghai Dragons came into the season with a roster filled with only Chinese players, and the players on the Dragons were the only Chinese players in the league. But maybe that means they built a Chinese super team. Well, not exactly. The Shanghai Dragons signed a collection of players from teams like 1246, FTD Club, LGC Gaming, Vici Gaming, and Team CC. Another element to having an all-Chinese team, though, is that the strategies that were being used in China were different from everywhere else in the world. The owner of the Shanghai Dragons was a company called NetEase, and one aspect of NetEase's business was providing online servers in China for Blizzard games like Overwatch, World of Warcraft, and StarCraft 2. But these servers were kept separate from other servers accessible to global Overwatch players like the American, Asian, or European servers, because of this silo that they put themselves in. The Chinese scene started to develop its own tactics and playstyle. Gushui, a Chinese player who would join the Overwatch League in Season 2, said the biggest difference is in the tempo of the games. Compared to Korean teams, Chinese teams play more slowly and hesitantly. I think the main reason behind this difference is that Korean teams prioritize coordination more, and with their deeper understanding of the game, they have a more unified mindset. And there's real proof when you watch Korean teams who have been together for multiple months playing against teams that were built piece by piece at the start of the Overwatch League. But let me explain the basics of Overwatch 1. There's damage characters, also known as DPS, tanks, and supports. Damage characters are meant to do damage to the other team, obviously. But damage characters can be messily broken down into 2 categories, hit scan and projectile. A hit scan character has something like a sniper machine gun, and when you click, the time between your click and the bullet reaching its target is extremely short. Essentially, you just have to click heads. A projectile character would have something like shuriken or would shoot rockets, which take much longer to reach their target, so you need to account for the movement of the other players. But these projectiles usually do more damage. Then there's tank characters, who are the front line of a team. They're meant to absorb damage, create space, and lead the team in their positioning. Tanks can be broken into 2 categories. Main tanks, which generally have a shield and relatively short effective range, and flex tanks, which are a little more mobile, maybe have a bit more range, and are meant to help cover supports and help DPS close out kills. And finally, we have support characters, who are the backline. They heal the other players so they can push forward. Main supports output a lot of healing with some minor utility. Flex supports trade off slightly less healing for more utility, like a speed boost or a damage multiplier. Each character has 2 to 3 abilities on cooldown, and an ultimate ability that you build by doing damage that can, if used well, swing the tide of a fight. At the time that the Overwatch League was starting, the meta, or the ideal selection of characters and playstyle, was called Dive. And the characters played in Dive were Winston, D.Va, Tracer, Genji, Mercy, and Zenyatta. Now let me give you a bit of an update on the Shanghai Dragons, who we'll be following for the rest of this video. Their main support was altering, with 5 King and Freefield fighting for the flex support position. Their main tank was Roshan, with Zushu and MG fighting for the off-tank position. And then their DPS were Dia and Undead, 2 players who specialize in hit scan. Not really ideal, but we'll get to that later. The basic structure of an Overwatch match is this. It's first to 3, but no matter what, they're playing 4 rounds on 4 different map types, with a 5th map if the teams are tied. The 4 map types are Escort, Control, Hybrid, and Assault. On an Escort map, an attacking team tries to push a cart to a finish line while the other team is trying to defend. On a Control map, it kind of operates like King of the Hill. Each team is vying for possession of a central point. On a Hybrid map, an attacking team needs to capture a point, then push a cart to a finish line while the other team tries to defend. And on an Assault map, an attacking team is trying to capture an A, then a B point while the other team tries to defend. It's pretty basic once you see it in action. Essentially, it's like all sports, where one team is trying to do something and the other team is trying to stop them from doing that thing. On January 10th, 2018, our Shanghai Dragons made their debut. Now, after their preseason performance where they lost to the Seoul Dynasty and the Boston Uprising, there wasn't a great outlook on this team. But who knows? Once you start playing, anything can happen. They debuted against the Los Angeles Gladiators, the team owned by Stan Kroenke, who I mentioned, who is actually worth $17 billion, but also married Ann Walton, who's the daughter of Bud Walton, the co-founder of Walmart, who's also worth $10 billion, which seems unfair. But that's for someone else to figure out, I guess. The Gladiators were seen as a team destined to be mid, but they did something pretty smart when you look back on it. When building the team, the Gladiators prioritized synergy between the tank and the support lines. The tanks for the Gladiators were iRemix and Bishu, who'd played together previously, and the supports were Shaz and Big Goose, who'd also played together previously, meaning that each of these lines had existing synergy. The reason I think this was smart is because tanks and supports are more reliant on coordination than DPS players are. And then this allowed them to go and look for the most skilled DPS available, in which they got Surefour and Hydration, who would become 2 of the most reliable hit scan and projectile players respectively in the league, along with Asher, who was a tracer specialist. So then moving forward, all they had to really do was mesh as a team instead of having to mesh each pair of players together and then also as a team as a whole. So let's see how the Dragons do in their first game. The Gladiators stomped the Dragons, beating them 4-0, and it wasn't even really close. The most demoralizing part of this game was that the Dragons got full held on 3 maps, meaning they didn't capture any of the checkpoints. Pretty much just showing that the Dragons were not ready to compete at this level. It's not ideal. Not an ideal first showing, but it's okay. There's one thing I think we should look out for that is kind of next to meaningless aside from map differential, and that's losing the first 3 and then winning the 4th map. If a team wins the first 3 maps, then that team's already won the game, but they have to play the 4th map anyway. So usually, they might mess around a little bit or take it a little less seriously. So if we see the Dragons picking up 4th maps, it might not be because they performed super well. But let's use this as a baseline for where the team's at, and let's talk about some of the good takeaways. D and Undead are pretty much the stars of the team. If they can really build up the support around them in terms of their tank and support lines, bringing them up to league average or maybe a bit above that, this team could be in the middle of the pack, I guess. So the problem with the Dragons in this game was that they couldn't really rotate cohesively, and then they also weren't really able to dive in unison, so they could barely coordinate themselves to put up any defense. The good thing is that it can only go up from here, hopefully. Let's see how they go over the next couple games. Alright, that's not good at all. In the last 7 games, the Dragons have played 29 maps and only won 4. Their closest contest was against the Philadelphia Fusion, who were owned by Comcast. They fought to get into a 5th map, but they got demolished on the tie-breaking Control map. 8 games into the league, the Dragons are the only winless team, because they got 4-0'd by the Florida Mayhem, who are also really bad. The Dragons are getting desperate. They're getting close to the end of the stage, and they don't really seem to be making any progress. Thankfully, in Week 5, they're facing a team that's crumbling at the seams. The Dallas Fuel were one of the most hyped teams coming into this season. Their parent organization, Envy Gaming, pulled their existing Overwatch team, Team Envy, into the league, and Team Envy was one of the most dominant North American Overwatch teams. They also signed a rising Twitch star, a French Canadian who can't speak French or Canadian, XQC, who's more known now for his gambling streams and kind of being illegible. After losing to the Dynasty and Valiant in Week 1, the Fuel would face their Texan rival, the Houston Outlaws, who coincidentally just 4-0'd the Shanghai Dragons like less than 12 hours before this. The Outlaws dominated the Fuel, and in the post-game interview, the Outlaws' main tank, Muma, says,
I mean, thanks to all our fans, couldn't do without you, and in the wise words of a good friend of mine, rolled and smoked my doggies.
Now everyone knows that's a classic XQC catchphrase. We all know that. Everyone knows that. But XQC took exception to the rib, getting kind of stun-locked on the topic because he didn't play in the game. And after what feels like hours of him mumbling around trying to figure out what to say, he says this.
Boom! Dunks that shit! Runs up to the fucking enemy bench of some dude that has like a broken arm. Says, "Get fucked! I'll play, dude! I smoked you, dude!" No, you didn't smoke shit. No, shut your fucking mouth. Go back there, suck a fat cock. I mean, he would like it, but...
So many games ahead. Love you. I'll have a little Kappa.
That's not a thing. That's not a thing, dude. Please.
Now, not that this needs any extra context, aside from the fact that he told a fellow player to suck a fat cock, but Muma was also the first openly gay player in the Overwatch League. And imagine, not comparing their skills here, but imagine if two NBA players said this to each other. Like, imagine if Durant told LeBron to go suck a fat cock. That probably wouldn't go over super well, right? XQC was quickly suspended for the rest of Stage 1 by the Dallas Fuel. Was XQC the keystone keeping the Dallas Fuel together? No, I don't think so. Like I said, he didn't play in that Outlaws game and he wasn't getting a ton of playing time. But as we talked about, teams need to develop cohesion, and having drama go on behind the scenes doesn't help a team cohese. The Fuel lost 4 out of their next 5 games, giving them a whopping 1-7 record by Week 5 when they met our Shanghai Dragons. The Dragons came out hot, winning their first map of a game for the first time in their storied history. They would lose the next 2 maps pretty handedly, but were able to fight off the Fuel on Dorado, sending them to a 5th map. Looking at the stats, the Dragons have lost 9 out of 10 of the control maps they've played up until this point, so the outlook is pretty grim. And then in the first round, the Dallas Fuel easily win, 100-0. The second round, there's a little bit of slight jousting, and then the Dragons are able to pull out the win. And then in the third round, this is just a classic Dragons blunder with uncertain strategies, bad positioning, and Dia really trying to do his best. The Dragons would lose their 9th game, then get stomped in their next game against the Valiant, making the team winless for Stage 1 with a -30 map differential. The Dragons have obvious weaknesses, and they have 2 options here. The first is to bring in new players to try and address these weaknesses, or I guess just hope. They did the former and brought in new players in the form of a Chinese support and 3 Korean players. Now here's the thing about Korean players in Overwatch at this time. They were absolutely dominant. As soon as Overwatch released, Koreans were dominating the game. South Korea won the first 3 Overwatch World Cups, and almost 50% of the players in the Overwatch League were from Korea. Most Western teams would sign a Korean player, and they'd be the most exciting player on the roster, like say a player on the Mayhem or Architect on the Shock. Bench players on the Spitfire, NYXL, and Dynasty were good enough to be stars on other teams, and had their own fan bases spring up around them like Pine on the NYXL. Then you'd hear rumors of these 16 and 17-year-old prodigies waiting to be of age so they could come over and dominate the league. In the early years of Overwatch, Korea was cranking out superstars like an Illinois McDonald's cranks out McDoubles on the 4th of July. So I could say they signed 4 players, but it is a bit of an important distinction that they signed 3 Korean players because they were at this time just so much better at the game than everyone else. The players that the Dragons signed were Sky, the aforementioned Chinese support who was desperately needed on this team. They also signed Otto, a Korean DPS who specialized more in projectile characters, which really helps because Dia and Undead, as we said, mainly played hitscan, making the team very inflexible. Then there was Fearless, a Korean main tank, to try and bring some more stability to their front line. Then there was Geguri, a Korean off-tank mostly known for her incredibly effective Zarya play. She also happened to be the first and only woman to play in the Overwatch League. In an article released by the Shanghai Dragons on Weibo in 2020, They chronicled her beginnings as a 17-year-old grinding Overwatch at internet cafes and her rapid rise to an 80% win rate over 420 games on ranked as Zarya. After a game in the 2016 qualifiers for the Spacetime Cup, she was accused of aimbotting by 2 players on the team Dizziness. She initially took this as a compliment, but it quickly became a lightning rod for male players to spew hatred at her. As we know, this is nothing new for women in gaming. One of the main points against her was that there was something weird going on with her reticle. And then another main point was that girls can't play video games well. Though my wife wiping my ass at Mario Kart like I've just soiled my diaper is evidence to the contrary. One of the Dizziness players that accused her of cheating said if the sponsor of Dizziness gives up sponsorship because of the lost game, he will go to Geguri's house with a knife. The coach of her team at the time, Coach Lime, signed 2 agreements. The first was that if Geguri was found to be cheating by Blizzard, she'd be removed from the team. Which is reasonable. People who cheat in sports are generally not allowed to play the sports anymore. The second was if the accusations were false, the 2 players that accused her would quit playing professional Overwatch. Blizzard's Korean branch quickly concluded that she hadn't been cheating, but obviously that wasn't enough, so she did a live stream to prove it. That stream peaked at 400,000 viewers, and at one point she started to break down and cry. But the stream cleared her name even further. The 2 Dizziness players who accused her left Pro Overwatch, and some of the other players who hurled abuse at her during this time also lost their careers in esports because who really wants to be around that? Geguri's team would be the runner-ups in the Spacetime Cup, and she would later play for ROX Orcas, a team that didn't have a lot of success, but she stood out on as a star. Then she was signed by the Dragons, and before she even came to America, she started to learn Chinese so she could communicate with her teammates. Unfortunately, Mike Pompeo had other plans. Sky, Otto, Fearless, and Geguri got stuck in visa hell, so going into stage 2 was the original Dragons. So we'll just leave these 4 up here for now until they can join the team for real. The Dragons' first game of stage 2 was against the Dallas Fuel, who've added some new players since we last met them. First they signed French hitscan legend AKM, known for his Soldier 76 play. And then they made a deal with the Spitfire for projectile specialist Rascal. Rascal is an example of one of those players I was talking about, where he's a bench player on the London Spitfire, but when you put him on the Dallas Fuel, he really shows his talents and becomes close to a star in some of his play. On map 1, Volskaya Industries, the Dragons come out running a single support, 3 DPS, 2 tank lineup, which doesn't really work on defense against the Fuel, who end up finishing Volskaya Industries with 6 minutes remaining. On the Dragons' attack, they don't make almost any progress. The Fuel then take both control rounds easily against the Dragons. The Dragons then put up a fight when defending Hollywood. The Fuel complete the map in overtime, which is better than letting them finish the map with time, but ideally you'd want them to not finish the map at all. For the Dragons' attack on Hollywood, they run a 4 tank lineup. They rush the point, take it relatively easily, and then roll through the map, ending with time, meaning all they have to do in the next round is capture the point to win. The crowd goes absolutely crazy when they finish the map with time. But then in the next round, when they capture the point and win the map, the crowd goes even crazier.
But let's stay alive in the series, it's 2-1, but the Dragons have brought it back.
This is the point when it's clear that the Dragons were pretty much every fan's second favorite team. It's always fun to root for an underdog. On map 4, Route 66, feeling good, the Dragons' defense is good enough to push the Fuel into overtime again. Now the Dragons need to at least match the Fuel in this push, but their attack comes out looking as limp as Harry Potter's forearm after he breaks it playing Quidditch. On defense, Rascal can't help but build his EMP for almost every fight, shutting down the Dragons with an impressive display on Sombra. The Dragons start stage 2 with a loss, but maybe there's something to this quad tank lineup that they figured out. So let's see how they do for the rest of the stage. Okay, so 4 losses in a row isn't good, but I'm hearing that there's some breaking news. Following the team's 14th straight loss, their coach U4 has stepped down. Kong will step in to be their interim coach before the position is filled in a couple weeks by Rui. You never really want someone to lose their job, but maybe it's good to get a new set of eyes on this team. So let's see how they do for the rest of the stage. Jesus Christ. The Dragons lost another 10 games, but to make it worse, the Dragons only won 2 maps. 2 out of 40 maps. That's a 5% win rate. The second worst team this stage were the Dallas Fuel, who went 2-8 with a 30% map win rate, blowing the Dragons out of the water with mediocrity. To call this stage demoralizing is an understatement. Now to bring some historical context to this run that they're on. The longest losing streak in American sports is owned by the 1942 to 1945 Chicago Cardinals, who were an NFL team. They lost 29 games in a row, but the silver lining is that 2 years later, the Cardinals would go on to win the NFL championship game, which was basically the Super Bowl before the Super Bowl existed. Another question you may have is whether the Dragons were worse or if every other team in the league just got better. And I think it's a bit of both. It's hard to stay invested knowing you're probably going to lose playing time when other people's visas come through. And after you've lost 20 games in a row, it's even harder to care. But across the league, the Dragons also reached a tipping point where it became more embarrassing for other teams to lose to the Dragons than for the Dragons to just keep their losing streak going. So teams would specifically practice for the Dragons and practice harder than they would for any other team because they didn't want to be the ones that the streak was broken against. So any successful strategies the Dragons might have found or been working on were just going to be so much harder to execute. And also with the Dragons, good news tends to come with bad news. The bad news is that Undead, the second most promising player on the team behind Dia, was allegedly a mentally and physically abusive boyfriend to his then girlfriend. So the Dragons kicked his ass off the team. Good news, Sky, Otto, Fearless, and Geguri were all available to start Stage 3. They also brought in another DPS, Damon, to fill and arguably upgrade the Undead-sized hole that was left now. So 5 new players to revitalize this team. Let's do another roster update. At support, we have Altering at main support. Then we have 5 King, Free Feel, and Sky filling out the off-support role. At main tank, we've got Roshan and Fearless, with Zushu, MG, and Geguri at off-tank. Then at DPS, we have Dia and Damon playing hit scan mostly, and Otto bringing in a specialty on projectiles, greatly increasing their flexibility. So this team looks decent. It looks like they can win a game. And the analysts think so too. Unless the Dragons are playing one of the top teams in the league, it's hard not to pick them, just for the hope. And also, if you're a gambler, they can't keep losing. They're not going to lose forever. So at some point, they've got to win. And their first game of Stage 3 is against a familiar foe who's still struggling, the Dallas Fuel. The Fuel have continued to lack consistency. They signed OG, who's a very good main tank. OG was then suspended for 4 games when it was discovered he boosted accounts the summer before he joined the team. Boosting accounts basically means you play for someone who's worse than you to get them into a higher rank. Then XQC was released from the team for spamming Tryhard 7 when Malik, one of the black analysts of the Overwatch League, was on screen. It doesn't sound bad when I say it like that, but it was a thing on Twitch to spam Tryhard 7 when there was a black person on the stream, which is just freak behavior and not really what the Overwatch League wants to foster. And also his general behavior on his personal stream was a bit of a nightmare for the Fuel and the Overwatch League, so it was kind of a long time coming. The Fuel also traded Custa, their sturdy main support and shot caller, to the Valiant for Unko, who was a flex support and a little quieter. And this move was immediately questioned by analysts for kind of being a shocking decision. Before the match, all 3 analysts picked the Dragons to win. The crowd went crazy, and there were Geguri signs already signaling her rise to becoming a fan favorite. Is Game 21 gonna be where the Dragons finally win? No. The Dragons lose 3-1 to the Fuel again, and it's not particularly close. Every Dragons push feels like they're dragging a 500-pound boulder behind them, and every Fuel push feels like a scrimmage. The Dragons pick up a map 4, which doesn't really matter, but I guess helps with their map differential. Maybe I got a little too excited there. They just got together. Let's see how the team does over the rest of Stage 3 and if they can build some cohesion. After a couple weeks, it still feels like there's something wrong. It looks like their communication is an issue, which also makes sense. You're mixing Chinese and Korean players who obviously have 2 different native languages, and it's not incredibly easy to learn another language. So on top of trying to figure out how to play together, they need to learn a language to speak with each other, whether that's Korean, a Chinese dialect, or English to meet in the middle, I guess. But their skill level is higher in theory. In week 4, it felt like the Dragons were starting to put it together, and their new pieces were meshing with their old pieces, maybe making a team that could win. They went up against the Boston Uprising, who'd won every game in Stage 3 up until this match. And the Dragons managed to put up a good fight, but the Uprising continued their winning streak, and would continue it to the end of the stage, going 10-0. Their second game of week 4 was against the Philadelphia Fusion, and it was also the Dragons' 20th game of the season, meaning if they lose, they'll be 1 game away from the record set by the Chicago Cardinals. And the thing is, their 29th and 30th games were against 2 of the best teams in the league, so they probably weren't going to win those. So this was maybe their chance to not break the record. Out of the gate, the Dragons looked quite bad on Temple of Anubis, and you could feel the audience get quiet as they expected to watch the Shanghai Dragons get stomped again. But on Blizzard World, the Dragons seemed to get some juice out of nowhere. Geguri dropped a nice self-destruct on their way to finishing the map. Then they had a butt-clenching but effective defense taking this second map. The next 2 maps were Nepal and Junkertown. Both teams suck at these maps, but at this point there's no pressure on the Dragons really. Like there's no pressure on Tim Hortons to start making their food good. But there's all the pressure in the world on the Fusion, because every map they lose or tie directly affects their chances at the stage playoffs and also the regular season playoffs, which are less than a couple months away. The Fusion and Dragons trade the first 2 rounds on Nepal, sending it to a 3rd round, which is a super messy fight where the Fusion are able to pull out the win. But still the pressure's on the Fusion. The Dragons come out on Junkertown looking limp again, but gain momentum and finish the map with just over a minute on the clock, which is a great showing for them. Now, there's even more pressure on the Fusion. The Fusion need to finish the map with time. But the Dragons don't let that happen. They full hold the Fusion, and it's demoralizing to watch. But the crowd loves it. The Dragons are going to their 3rd map 5 in team history. Now the last 2 didn't go so well, but they were playing on a different map than those last 2. And the Dragons showed some killer instinct on Junkertown, so maybe they'll be able to carry that over onto Oasis. As a Dragons fan, this map sucks to watch. Every time you feel like the Dragons are going to make progress, the Fuel just come back and easily clean them off the point. The Fuel took both rounds 100-0, again meaning it wasn't even close. The Dragons have lost 28 games in a row, and obviously they would go on to lose the next 2 games to the NYXL and the Spitfire to make it an even 0-30, a losing streak longer than the Chicago Cardinals, the longest losing streak in American sports. But in all fairness to Shanghai, beating the Fusion was a long shot. The Fusion got through their bumps in the middle of the season to get all the way to the grand finals, where they would lose to the Spitfire, but they were still one of the best teams in the league. Stage 3 was the Dragons' best stage of the season also. They won 9 maps, most of them being meaningful, and made a couple good teams' hearts skip a beat. Oh, but wait, I'm getting some breaking news. Between stages, Rui, the coach who replaced U4, has stepped down and Kong is back in as interim coach, and I think they're just going to leave him in there. Stage 4 started exactly as the last 2 stages, with week 1 losses to the Fuel and Valiant. There was also a bit of a meta shift at this time, where a hero named Brigida was added to the game. Some fans would say that if Brigida wasn't added to the game, the Dragons could have beat the Fuel, but we'll never know for sure. On May 21st, the team's manager Van released a twit longer to kind of address some problems that the Dragons have. First of all, apologizing for how bad the Dragons are, but then stating that the Dragons were practicing from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., with possible extensions to midnight 6 days a week. That's 72 hours of practice per week. And during the 2 weeks between stages, the Dragons would get 3 to 4 days off, but practice the rest of the time. If you've played 12 hours of a video game in a single day before, you know it kind of messes you up. And I can't imagine doing that 6 days a week. Now to do a little math, if this was the Dragons' training schedule from day 1, they would have practiced Overwatch for 1,800 hours, plus the actual games that they had to play. Obviously I don't know when they actually started this training schedule, but still, they were playing too much Overwatch, and it clearly wasn't working. Van also addressed criticisms from fans about Dragons players playing games aside from Overwatch every once in a while, and what an insane thing to do. And after an investigation, they found the Dragons played these other games on their off days, displaying a sickening lack of the Sigma grind set. You know, if these Dragons just had the Sigma grind set, they wouldn't have lost all these games. They need to practice 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. Obviously, I'm kidding. That would be an insane thing to do, and I don't think it really helps to practice that much. Because at some point, you kind of lose the love for the game. And I'm honestly surprised the Dragons weren't projectile vomiting at the sound of the Overwatch boot music by the end of the season.
I think I'm like hot.
Progress here.
Pull over!
Okay. Oh, chunkage.
The Dragons would lose their next 4 games without winning a map. But in week 4, it was their last chance to win a game. The only team in the league they had a puncher's chance against at this point was the Florida Mayhem. Every other team had locked down and was ready for playoffs, but the Mayhem were still the second worst team in the league. They'd won 6 games up to this point, 2 of which were against the Dragons, and had a -69 map differential, the pervert number, so that doesn't help them at all. If I was the coach of the Dragons, I would have been practicing for the Mayhem since the first week of this stage, because honestly, you're not going to beat any of the other teams. This is the game that should have been marked on the calendar. The crowd had hope. The analysts had hope.
I'm going with the Dragons today! The Dragoons are gonna be taking it, Johnny!
Everyone watching at home had hope that the Dragons would be able to pull it together and just win 3 maps. It sounds like such a small accomplishment, but they still haven't been able to achieve it. As the Dragons walk out, you can see the 1,000 hours of practice weighing them down. Why the fuck would they want to keep playing this game at this point? Every time they play it, they lose. Or they're practicing for 12 hours straight. As the Mayhem walk out, you can see the team doesn't really want to be embarrassed, but they're feeling pretty confident because they're playing the Dragons. So the first map is Blizzard World. The Dragons capture the point, the crowd goes ballistic.
And it's the pick on Logics at the beginning that sets everything up. If you're able to take...
Then they get the card a sliver away from the second checkpoint before crumbling and giving the Mayhem an easily achievable win condition. And the Mayhem take advantage, just pushing the card to where the Dragons got it to. 1-0 for the Mayhem. The next map is Horizon Lunar Colony, which is an assault map. The Dragons attack first and have a hard time making any progress. They got stuck on Sombra for a while trying to utilize her EMP, but it's underwhelming when they do actually get it used. They make it through both checkpoints in overtime, which is an accomplishment, but they feel a little disjointed. The Mayhem attack, and the Dragons put up a staunch defense, full holding the Mayhem. It's 1-1. Lijiang Tower is a control map. The Dragons are bad at control maps. The last control map they won was in Stage 3 against the Seoul Dynasty, over 2 months ago. Otto and Dia seem to have made it their mission to dominate this map. The Mayhem can't get any traction in the first round, and the Dragons take it 100-0. The second round, the Mayhem take the point first, run it up to 99, but then Otto kills 3 of the Mayhem. The Dragons flip the point and park the bus, fending off the Mayhem and winning the round, and the map. It's 2-1 for the Dragons. Holy shit, this is the first time the Dragons have ever had a lead going into a 4th map. Ever. This is the first time they've ever had a lead. In their entire history, they have never led going into a 4th map. The 4th map is Gibraltar, an escort map. Shanghai dominates on their first push and makes it to the end of the map behind a heroic self-destruct by Geguri. The crowd explodes.
Both supports are down now! The Dragons...
All the Dragons need to do is put up a good defense, like they've done so many times. I guess maybe not so many, but like they've done before. The Mayhem come out aggressive. They get to the first checkpoint too easily. The crowd kind of deflates. The Dragons just got punched in the mouth, and they can't seem to get coordinated. The Mayhem take the second checkpoint easily. The crowd is absolutely dead silent as the Mayhem approach the final bend with 5 minutes left on the clock. It's not impossible to stop a team at this corner. Lord knows it's happened to me many times in my gold games, but the Dragons can't hold them there. And the Mayhem finishes with double the Dragons' time. In the extra rounds for this map, the Dragons attack first because they had less time. And in an impressive show of grit, they almost get to the second checkpoint. They're in a really good position for putting up such a poor defense before. But then again, the Mayhem have 4 full minutes to attack. The Dragons burn off half the Mayhem's time with a decently coordinated defense. The Dragons are literally 1 minute and 30 seconds away from winning if they can hold off the Mayhem. But an unorganized defense gives the Mayhem enough space to win and take it to a map 5. And the Dragons are not good on map 5s. The 5th map is Nepal. They won the first control map in this match, which is rare. Maybe they can do it again, but they've also never won on Nepal. In round 1, the point flip-flops until Manitin hits a critical self-destruct, winning the round for the Mayhem essentially. 1-0 for the Mayhem on map 5. Round 2. The Dragons and Mayhem jostle for the point a bit before the Dragons switch to dive and retake the point. The Mayhem commit both support ults to the fight, putting real pressure on the Dragons, but Otto pulls out a heroic Dragon Blade, flipping the point and taking the round for the Dragons. It's 1-1 on map 5. They need to win one more round. The Blizzard Arena is electric.
No way that they're going to get their mat, and there it is. Okay.
1 point to decide it all.
Everyone in the building was a Shanghai fan at this point. But then the Dragons play one of the most puzzling rounds of professional Overwatch I've ever seen. The conventional wisdom when playing Nepal Sanctum is to play the composition the Dragons and Mayhem came out playing. The problem with that is that the Dragons aren't good. Clearly, we've chronicled 35 straight losses up to this point. You kind of just need to do what you're best at, or what's working. And every good moment the Dragons have had in this game is when they were playing dive. So the decision should be to play to your team's strength. So the Dragons should not listen to conventional wisdom here. They need to go with what's working. In the first fight, the Dragons immediately get dominated. Then Fearless and Geguri switch their characters, resetting their ult charge. A good gamble if they win the next fight, but it's tough to make up that lost progress. You can hear the casters try to make sense of it, but they aren't inspiring much hope.
Really interesting. So now you have auto play Tracer, probably to harass Logix and Azubi in the back. And you're going to have Fearless play Roadhogging, Geguri play
on Orisa.
Yeah, so they actually used to do this on Junkertown. Fearless would switch, Geguri doesn't really play much Roadhog, so they would have Fearless play the Roadhog, Geguri would play the Orisa. It's a little risky to bring out here late though.
The Dragons lose the next fight. Then Geguri and Fearless immediately switch to dive tanks, maybe what they should have been doing since the start. But this resets their ult charge again, and the Mayhem have almost all their ults, and have almost fully captured the point. So the Dragons re-engage, but they're pushing into a team full of ults, and they don't really have any resources. And it's just kind of this sad map where they lose the round without much fanfare. And when they cut to the crowd, it's dead silent.
And the Shanghai Dragons, beloved Dragons, today is not your day, but when it is, it will be sweet. It's the Mayhem today to take away the win, right at the death of things, pushed all the way by Shanghai.
But it sucks. It's horrible to watch, and the Dragons have just fumbled their last chance to win, and it truly was their last chance to win this season. In the next 3 maps, the Dragons would get 4-0'd by the Uprising, the Gladiators, and the San Francisco Shock. The Dragons finished the inaugural season of the Overwatch League with a -120 map differential, 0 wins, and 40 losses. A 40-game losing streak. This is one of the worst seasons I've ever seen a team have. But here's the thing. A historic losing streak is not one individual's personal failing. And I hope they all went on to lead happy and successful lives, maybe except for Undead. And by all accounts, the Dragons really tried. They practiced constantly, they brought in new players, they tried 3 different coaches, and constantly tried different strategies. But they were like a piece of paper trying to hold up a 50-pound dumbbell. It was just not going to happen for them. But the reason I wanted to make this video and tell this story is because I wanted to commend this team for trying every single week. Even if they looked like they were dead or they hated the game, they were still trying to win. I've been on some truly horrific teams in my time, and I know how hard it can be to put everything into a game when your effort seems to amount to nothing. And the 2018 Shanghai Dragons are like the clearest example of putting everything into something and getting almost no reward. The 2019 season of the Overwatch League saw a lot of changes, including the addition of 8 teams rounding the league out to an even 20. And the Shanghai Dragons obviously also made some significant changes. The Dragons kept 2 players from the version of the Dragons that we know, and you can probably guess them. It was Geguri and Dia. Their 2 brightest spots on the team. Then they went out and instead of pigeonholing themselves with only trying to sign Chinese talent, they signed the best talent possible. Their most notable pickups being Gamsu, a star main tank from the Boston Uprising, who was an instant upgrade. They also signed some exciting young DPS players in hit scan specialist DM and projectile specialist Ding, as well as Luffy and Koma to build up their support line. Going into Season 2, the Dragons effectively had a fresh start. In Week 1, the Dragons had some trouble, losing to the Hangzhou Spark and the Vancouver Titans, 2 expansion teams, extending their losing streak even farther to 42 games. 42 games, and they haven't won. At this time, the team seemed kind of cursed, but the Dragons proved that wrong. In Week 2, the Dragons put everything that they went through behind them, and in a game against the Boston Uprising, they finally won. They climbed the mountain, they made it to the top, and Dia and Geguri got through it all.
Calyx gonna be eliminated. Transcendence is out from Aim God, but it's gonna expire. They will be able to finish him up. There you go. They're gonna get it. Just a couple more percent to go. Let them have it, Boston. Axiom, top of the primal range, but it does not matter. Ladies and gentlemen, history has been made. The Shanghai Dragons, on the 43rd attempt out, managed to pick up their first match victory.
Never thought, the fans never thought they'd see this day. It took 43 matches in Gamsu defeating his old team tonight. Feels like a really emotional moment here, but I think we got to give the crowd their moment. They've waited a long time for this. All the Shanghai fans out there, fans in tears. They finally did it.
I'll just let the fans take us out to the break. Enjoy it.
The Dragons would go on to win Stage 3 of this season and make the playoffs, a first, obviously. The season after that, the Dragons would have the best record in the regular season, and then the season after that, the Dragons would win it all. In my heart, the Dragons winning it all is a bit bittersweet. None of the players from that inaugural team stayed with the team long enough to win the championship. Geguri and Dia stayed with the team until the prior season, but they were both getting limited playing time, and the Dragons, I guess, needed to shed their past to achieve their full potential. But I do wish that Geguri and Dia got to stand on that stage with the trophy. And then 2 years later, the Overwatch League, the most ambitious undertaking in esports history, would end because of declining viewership and mounting costs. Some would blame the switch from streaming on Twitch to YouTube in Season 2. Some would blame the meta shift to GOATs, which is a comp that rose to popularity in Season 2 that featured no DPS characters and was relatively boring to watch because it was just two big groups of people smashing into each other. Some would blame Blizzard for abandoning the game in favor of Overwatch 2, not putting out too many updates or new heroes or new maps. I'm sure all of these things contributed to the demise of the Overwatch League, which is truly sad. There was a point in my life where this was one of my favorite things. I had an Overwatch League podcast. I watched pretty much every week, but like so many, I stopped watching after a while. But looking back on it now, I think it's better to try and be happy that it happened than sad that it's gone. And remember that some pretty incredible things happened, like a team losing 42 straight games in a fucking season. That is ridiculous. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. And go Dragons go.